Graphic content viewer discretion is advised. On this case, we'll look into Dawn Meade. Dawn Meade was only 40 years old when she died. She had her son Joseph at an early age, and the two were very close. In May 2017, Dawn was dropped off at the bus station with her boyfriend Greg Virus. Dawn was moving from New Haven, Connecticut to Louisa County, Virginia to help Greg's grandmother and brother James get back on their feet. Dawn's sister Denise said that they were very excited for Dawn. Dawn was very sociable and could make friends with everyone. Joseph said that Greg seemed like a funny guy and made his mom very happy. On September 21st, 2017, Dawn and Greg decided to go out for dinner and drinks. The next morning, on September 22nd, the Louisa County Sheriff's Office received a call at 7:38 a.m. The call was from James Virus, Greg's brother. James was known to the police as he usually called when he wanted mental health help. James told the police that he was feeling manic from his bipolar disorder. He said he woke up that morning and saw that his grandmother's car, a green 2014 Chevy Cruze, had been damaged. He said it looked like a deer had been hit. The hood of the car and windshield were damaged. Deputy Alan Gallagher went to speak to James. While he was speaking with him, 2 more calls came in. A woman said she saw what looked like a Halloween decoration, but had actually been a dead body. A man told the police dispatcher that he saw a woman's body lying face down in a ditch near the Blue Ridge Shores gated community. The dispatcher asked the man if he could get out of his car to inspect it further. The man said the woman was deceased, as he didn't see her chest move. While Deputy Gallagher was speaking to James, he was told that his brother's girlfriend, Dawn Meade, didn't return home. Deputy Gallagher was already learning about the victim being found and knew that the car at the Veers home had damage to it. Dawn was identified by a tattoo that she had on her lower leg. Dawn had been found lying face down in a ditch on Firehouse Drive. Her body had been found right outside the gated area of the Blue Ridge Shores subdivision. Dawn had severe injuries that were consistent with being hit with a car. She had extensive injuries to her neck and lower abdomen. She also had a honeycomb pattern on her legs from the grill of the car. The Chevy Cruze had a unique honeycomb pattern on the grill, which matched the pattern on Dawn's legs. Before we continue learning more about this case, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. And now let's get back to the story. Dawn was hit so hard that her shoes landed in 2 different areas. One shoe was found in a tree, and the other was found about 28 feet away from her. Just next to the crime scene was a guard shack for the entrance of the subdivision. The guard shack had multiple surveillance cameras. The police started by watching the footage around 8 p.m. It wasn't until 11:02 p.m. when they caught their first glimpse at the 2014 Chevy Cruze. The police couldn't tell who was driving, but the license plate was visible and matched the car in the Veers driveway. The car entered the subdivision at 11:02 p.m. but left again and returned at 11:41 p.m. There was no damage to the car yet. The car again returns to the entrance but left again at 11:51 p.m. At 12:25 a.m., the car, now damaged, returns at a high-rated speed. The front license plate was almost bouncing as it was crooked and almost falling off. The car left again for one last time. When it returned at 12:39 a.m., the driver didn't use the keycard entrance. Instead, the driver uses the curve of the car to lift the bar and drove underneath it. The police were stunned as they had never seen anything like it. While the police were at the Veers home, James was read his Miranda right, but he pled the fifth. Greg was handcuffed so that he wouldn't interfere with the investigation. Greg and James's grandmother can be heard on the police body cam, asking Greg if he knew that Dawn was dead. Greg then jumps up from the front porch and says, "What? My girlfriend's dead?" While the police were in the driveway, Deputy Gallagher noticed red residue coming from the rear of the vehicle. Greg then walks over to them and kicks the car like he was trying to remove the evidence. The police took Greg down to the station for further questioning. Dawn's purse was also found inside the house. Inside, the police found a receipt from the Courthouse Cafe, which now looks like it has been renamed to King's All-American Restaurant and Pub. While the Veers brothers were at the police station, James told the police that had he pled the fifth because he didn't want to get anyone in trouble. James said the last person to drive the Chevy Cruze was his brother. Luckily, the Courthouse Cafe had surveillance cameras. Dawn and Greg were seen entering the pub at 9:35 p.m. It seemed like they were getting along. A little while later, they could be seen playing pool and having some drinks. While they were playing, Greg's body language seemed to change. He seemed angry, especially when another man came over to them and said he wanted to play the winner. The winner was Dawn, so the two played and talked. Dawn and Greg left the pub a little after 10 p.m. and could be seen getting into the Chevy Cruze. The other man stayed at the bar, so he was ruled out. The police were able to identify Greg as the driver from the Blue Ridge surveillance footage. In the bar, Greg was wearing a fluorescent yellow t-shirt. His t-shirt could be seen in the video when the arm comes out of the car to enter the subdivision. The police asked Greg where they went after leaving the pub. Greg said they fooled around in a field until Dawn got upset. Greg said Dawn walked away, so he drove around for a while looking for her. The police asked Greg what their fight was about. Greg said Dawn was mad because she wanted to drive, but he didn't let her because they had been drinking. Earlier in the day, Greg told the police that he didn't usually drive the car and hadn't driven that night. But when the police continued questioning him, his story changed. Greg told them that he had hit a mailbox that night, which is why the car was damaged. The police checked the area, but there were no damaged mailboxes. Greg said that his grandmother took the keys to the car away from him when got home. Greg said that his brother would often steal the keys from her room and was probably the one who took the car next. The police confronted Greg and said that Dawn died because she was hit by the car. They also knew from Greg's grandmother that she had only given permission to Greg to use the car, and that James never left the house. Greg continued to deny that he had anything to do with Dawn's death. The police learned that there was an order of protection between Dawn and Greg. Greg had been violent before, and had once given Dawn a black eye. When the police left the room, Greg can be heard saying, "Why did I say a fucking thing? You know better than that, dude." The police examined the surveillance footage one more time. At 12:30 a.m., when Greg entered the subdivision for the last time, he had changed his sweatshirt. He had been wearing the same blue sweatshirt the next morning when he was taken to the police station. Gregory Virus was arrested and charged with Dawn's murder. Greg's trial began on December 12, 2018. From the evidence, the theory was that Greg and Dawn left the pub together. They had gotten into an argument during the night, so Dawn got out of the car. Greg was seen leaving the subdivision several times because he was looking for her. The police believe that when Greg was seen driving at a high-rated speed, it's when he hit Dawn. He left the area one more time to make sure she was dead. Greg claimed to love Dawn, but he showed no remorse. On December 14, 2018, Greg was found guilty of first-degree murder and of felony hit and run. He was sentenced to life in prison. Maybe Greg became upset because Dawn was being friendly to another bar patron. Maybe Greg was just an abusive asshole and became angry when Dawn walked away from him. Probably both. Dawn seemed like a loving mother, sister, and daughter and was killed for absolutely no reason. My heart goes out to her family, especially her son.
Dave? Get everybody out here to my house now! Okay, alright. My wife and my kids are dead!
On September 28, 2000, former Indiana State Trooper David Camm came home from playing basketball to a horrifying sight. His wife Kim and their 2 young children had been shot to death in the garage of their Indiana home. But after calling the police, Camm became the prime suspect in this grisly murder case. The evidence seemed stacked against Camm, who was found with blood on his shirt and proven to have had multiple extramarital affairs. Camm would go on to face 3 murder trials and serve 13 years in prison. But it would eventually come out that investigators had failed to properly examine key pieces of evidence that would point to a different suspect. This is the story of David Camm's wrongful conviction and how he was found not guilty for all the murders. David Camm lived in Georgetown, Indiana, a sleepy suburb of Louisville, Kentucky. In 1989, he married Kimberly Wren, and they had 2 children, Bradley, 7, and Jill, 5. He had worked as a state trooper for about 10 years and seemed from the outside to have a happy marriage with a pleasant family life. On the night of the murders, Camm said he left the house to play basketball at a nearby church around 7 p.m. He claimed he came home later that night to find his wife and 2 young children shot dead in the family's garage. Around 9:30 p.m., He called his former police post to report the attack. This raised suspicion. Why hadn't he called an emergency dispatcher?
It's Radio Patrice, can I help you?
Patrice, it's Dave Camm. Let me talk to Post Command right now.
Okay, he's on another line.
Right now, let me talk to Post Command.
Hold on.
Dave? Get everybody out here to my house now. Okay, all right. My wife and my kids are dead. Get everybody out here to my house. They're coming. Go to Dave Camm's house now. Okay. Do you know what happened, David? No, they're dead. I just got them from playing basketball. 4548 Phillipsburg. Oh my God, what am I going to do?
Kim and Jill had both been shot in the head. Kim was found on the garage floor in her underwear, her shoes and socks removed and carefully placed on the roof of the vehicle. This would later become significant evidence in the case. But Bradley was draped over the back seat of the family's Ford Bronco as if he had been trying to get away from the assailant. He had been shot in the chest. Camm said he had taken Bradley out of the car to try to resuscitate him because he believed he was still alive. In doing so, he inadvertently contaminated the crime scene. Police arrived to find a distraught Camm with small droplets of blood on his shirt, which prosecutors later alleged proved he pulled the trigger. 3 days later, Camm was arrested and charged with the murders of his wife and children. During the first trial, almost a dozen women testified that Camm had had affairs with or propositioned them during his marriage. Prosecutors argued that blood spatter on his shirt and his history of infidelity were proof that Camm had killed his family. They suggested that he had sat out one basketball game, ran home and committed the murders, then returned to the church without anyone noticing. The state also alleged that Camm had molested Jill, though there was little evidence supporting this. The medical examiner had simply said that Jill had experienced blunt force trauma to the genitals sometime within the 24 hours leading up to her death, but failed to prove that David Camm had caused it. But the 11 basketball players Camm had played with that night testified that they had not seen him leave the gym, had not seen any blood spatter on his shirt, and hadn't noticed any odd behavior. Despite Camm's strong alibi, in 2002 he was found guilty of murdering his family and sentenced to 195 years in prison. But Camm successfully appealed, and 2 years later the state Supreme Court overturned the conviction, saying there wasn't enough evidence that his affairs were the motive. New evidence emerges, but Camm is convicted again. In 2000, a sweatshirt containing the DNA of an unknown male had been found at the crime scene, but the prosecution neglected to have it tested leading up to Camm's first murder trial. In 2005, the DNA was finally tested and found to match an 11-time convicted felon named Charles Boney. Boney's troubles with the law had begun in Bloomington, Indiana. According to people, he had become known as the Shoe Bandit. Notably, Boney was known to have a foot fetish and a history of attacking women and stealing their shoes. Soon it was found that Boney had also left a handprint on the Camm's Ford Bronco, placing him at the scene of the crime. But even though this new evidence strongly suggested that Boney had been involved in the murders, Camm and Boney were tried as co-conspirators, with Boney testifying that he only came to the Camm's home to sell David a gun, which David swiftly turned on his family. Boney was convicted and sentenced to 225 years in prison, but that didn't mean Camm was safe. In Camm's second trial, which overlapped with Boney's, prosecutors alleged that Kim had discovered her husband had molested Jill and that he killed his family to cover it up. Kim's friends testified that she had been upset in the weeks before the murders, but the defense argued that she had not told anyone that she was upset with her husband and that she had recently remodeled their bedroom, the News and Tribune reported. Crime scene reconstructionists hired by the prosecution testified that Jill's blood on Camm's shirt was from high-velocity blood spatter, which could only have come from his being within 4 feet of her at the time she was murdered. But several experts testified that the blood could have come from accidentally brushing against Jill after she died. The jury found Camm guilty. The jury said they'd been convinced by the expert testimony from a forensic pediatrician with the Kentucky Medical Examiner's Office, who claimed Jill had been molested by her father. David Camm was sentenced to life without parole. The Indiana Supreme Court overturned the conviction in 2009, saying that the prosecution biased the jury by alleging Camm molested his daughter without sufficient evidence to tie the crime to Camm. They ordered a third trial. It would be David Camm's last. For the third trial, prosecutors alleged that David Camm's motive was life insurance policies that Kim had recently taken out on the family. Charles Boney was brought in to testify. He said that on the evening of September 28, 2000, he was lured to the Camm house to meet David to sell him a gun. But when Kim and the children drove into the driveway, Boney said, Camm walked up to the vehicle and shot all three. Boney claimed Camm then handed Boney the gun and said, "You did this." Boney also claimed that, in his panic, he had tripped over Kim's shoes and placed them on the roof, and that he leaned into the car to check on the children, which was why his handprint was left on the car. He claimed he never touched any of the victims. The defense found that one expert the prosecution had previously brought in as a blood spatter expert had embellished his credentials, throwing doubt on claims that the pattern of blood on David Camm's clothes implied he pulled the trigger. Further DNA testing showed touch DNA from Boney on Jill Camm's shirt, as well as on Kim Camm's shirt, underwear, feet, and under her fingernails, invalidating Boney's claims that he never touched them. Tests also showed Kim's DNA on the sweatshirt Boney had left at the scene of the crime. On October 24, 2013, David Camm was found not guilty on all charges and allowed to walk free. David Camm served a total of 13 years in prison before he was finally acquitted. Charles Boney, who is still serving out his 225-year sentence, still alleges that Camm was the shooter. Kim's parents, Frank and Janice Wren, agree. The Wrens filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Camm, but they later dropped it in 2014. After his acquittal, David Camm sued Floyd County and the state of Indiana for $30 million. He settled with Floyd County for $450,000, and in 2022, Camm was awarded $4.6 million in damages from the state for malicious prosecution and wrongful imprisonment. The trials are believed to have cost Floyd County more than $4 million before the civil settlement. The bottom line is those trials were not fair, David Camm told News in 2018. They heard evidence that they should not have heard, and that's why the higher courts overturned those convictions.